Hair cloning is a topic that has fascinated patients and doctors for over 30 years, even before I entered the field of hair restoration. A more accurate terminology is hair multiplication, in which a small sample of hair follicles from a patient are expanded into hundreds or thousands of hair follicles, which can then be used either for surgical hair restoration or actually grow directly in the scalp. We've been talking about this for 30 years, but we still can't do it. To help me explore the topic further, I've invited one of the world's experts on hair multiplication, Dr. Ken Washenik. Hi, I'm Dr. Robert Haber, hair loss expert and hair transplant surgeon from Cleveland, Ohio. Join me and the Hair Transplant Road Show as I travel the globe seeking answers to important surgical and non-surgical hair loss questions from the true experts in the field. Today, the Hair Transplant Road Show travels to California, where my guest is Dr. Ken Washenik. Please support this program by selecting like, subscribe, and requesting notifications when our next episode is available. And feel free to post comments and topic suggestions as well. Ken is the president and chief medical officer of Bosley Medical Group. And when I mentioned that I was going to interview Ken, I had friends say, "Are you crazy? He's your biggest competitor. Why would you do that?" And my answer to that sort of comment is always the same. I don't have competitors, I have colleagues. Ken has been a good friend for many years and is one of the most intelligent people I know. He is also one of the world's experts on hair multiplication, and that is what this episode is all about. This is a big topic, so I'll be breaking this interview into 3 parts. This is part 1, focusing on the history of hair multiplication. Ken has served as president of the International Society of Hair Restoration Surgery, where he has reached fellow status. He's a recipient of the Platinum Follicle Award for his scientific contributions to our field. He's lectured extensively through the world and is one of just a few individuals who can speak intelligently on just about any scientific topic in the field of hair loss and hair restoration. He's the former chief executive officer of Adiron's Research Institute, a biotechnology firm involved in researching tissue-engineered hair follicle neogenesis and cellular-based hair restoration, which for simplicity, we will call hair multiplication. I'm honored to have him as my guest to help discuss this fascinating topic. Hi, Ken.
Hi, Bob. Thanks for having me, Dr. Haber. And I agree. Colleagues all the way. Joyfully so.
Absolutely. We are recording this interview on April 12th, 2024, 4 days after the great North American solar eclipse of 2024. I know you were in Dallas speaking at the World Congress for Hair Research, and I was going to head down there as well to do some photography, but the weather seemed dicey, so I stayed here in Cleveland, where we ended up having a beautiful afternoon, and I was able to capture some nice images. What did you see in Dallas of the eclipse?
So, it was one of those days that just went like you would hope it would. It was cloudy. We were iffy. What are we going to see? And then, figuratively, literally, the clouds parted, and we had full view of totality for a good long time. It was exciting. Everybody was obviously really into it and enjoyed it at the Congress.
For anybody who has not experienced totality, it's an incredible event. Photographs are beautiful, but they don't capture that incredible experience of taking your glasses off and looking at the sun. It was an extraordinary experience.
It really was. It was just everyone had a different impression, but no one thought it was not tremendous.
I'm glad the clouds parted for you. So about our topic, the basic concept, Ken, of taking a single hair follicle and using it to grow many hair follicles has been an elusive goal of researchers for decades. The implications of success are obvious: an endless supply of hair, potentially the end of baldness, and of course, riches for whomever first develops this technology. In the first part of this interview, I want to focus on the past. If I had $1 for every patient who asked me about hair cloning, as they usually call it, and as this way 2 people asked me, I'd have, lots of dollars. Can you summarize the hair multiplication journey thus far? I know that's a big thing to ask.
Well, I'm happy to, and I can give you, my view of it. And there have been a great number of really respected scientists from around the world who've worked on this project from a basic science standpoint to, hoping for a clinical aid to people with hair loss. So, there have been two ways that this has been looked at. One is creating new follicles, as you mentioned, follicle neogenesis, which people will like to refer to as hair cloning, and then really a regeneration of hair using cells to supplement hairs that have miniaturized. So, in our life at Adirond's Research, we started out with a goal of creating new hair follicles, completely de novo, take separate cells, have them come together and form hair follicles. And so I'll speak to that. I'm happy to speak to some research done by other folks, but at that time there were two main groups, two main schools of thought. One was to just work with dermal papillary cells, the dermal papilla, dermal sheath cells, the fibroblasts, and try to use those to induce hair follicle formation. And then there were the groups like ourselves that looked at using both the dermal fibroblasts, the dermal papilla cells, dermal sheath cells, and also the keratinocyte population, which included the keratinocyte stem cell population. People like to refer to it as the bulge, which is what it's called in the mouse. In the human, it's more of a sheath of the keratinocyte stem cells. So when we started out, we mixed these dermal and epidermal cells together after we cultured them. And our goal was to try different culture conditions, different growth factor cocktails to see how much we can increase the trichogenicity of these cells, or hair forming ability. And so we were very happy at the level of success we had at creating brand new hair follicles from dissociated dermal and epidermal cells in laboratory models, mouse models. As we progressed, and we developed this assay called the patch assay, and it's widely used around the world now in labs that are working on hair follicle science. And what we would do is inject our mixture of dermal and epidermal cells and then let them form a small area of new hair follicles. And so that occurred through a very cool process, fancy name, but easy to understand, of homotypic aggregation. So we injected just a mixture of cells. The dermal cells found each other. The epidermal cells, keratinocytes, found each other. And then the dermal cells turned on the growth of a hair follicle from the keratinocytes. So true, neogenesis, de novo formation of a hair follicle. As we continued doing that work and we moved into human systems where we looked at the injection of our cells into human skin, we saw something different. And it was not necessarily better or worse. And I could argue I was happy with the way it went, because what our cells did was they looked for existing hair follicles in the skin and honed in on them and repopulated them. So that was something we did not expect going in. But what we found was that miniaturized hair follicles, when we injected our cells, would become chimeric. And they would contain some original hair follicle cells that were there, and plus our injected cells. And we had a very cool model to look at that. So we had skin in the lab that came from women who had facelifts. So this pre-auricular hair right in front of the ear that doesn't have much in the way of terminal hairs. We would inject our experimental cells that we raised that were from men, so they had Y chromosomes. We would inject them into female skin, and then we'd look to see which cells in the hair follicle, if any, contained a Y chromosome, because that would mean we injected those. And what we saw was a mixture of the native cells plus our cells, resulting in hair follicle growth and a return to a larger caliber hair from these little vellus hair follicles.
And did it go from there? So with those functional hairs, so where did it stop? That was a decade or so ago. So why did it stop there?
Yeah, it didn't stop there. So we took that. So that was preclinical developmental work, seeing what we're going to be able to take into the clinic, what would have functionality for actual people with thinning hair. And we met with FDA and discussed with them our plans in what's called a pre-IND meeting, investigational new drug meeting. And we came out of those that meeting and subsequent meetings with a plan to go into phase 1 to show that injection of these cells as we raise them in culture was safe. And we did that. We put a number of patients through phase 1 trial. Interestingly, we ran that in the UK. We had it open in the US and the UK, but we finished the phase 1 in the UK before we got started in the US. And then we did phase 2 trials here in the US, which were sort of iterative. Small studies where we would change the growth factor milieu, if you will, the 11 secret herbs and spices, that we would put into the dermal cell cultures, the epidermal cell cultures, to increase their trichogenicity, a term I like to use because you don't get to use it that often in day-to-day conversation, but their hair forming potential. So we put a good number of folks, people, subjects through phase 2 in clinical trials in a variety of different study sites across the U.S. And we were happy to show that if we brought in some men losing their hair, we could take their cells from a small biopsy in the back of their scalp, very familiar to you and everyone else who does hair transplantation. So that's our donor area. We went there because we felt that it would be best for us to start with cells that were considered resistant to thinning or resistant to male pattern hair loss or androgenetic alopecia. So we would take that biopsy from the back of a person's scalp. Their physician, the clinical investigator, would send those to us in our cell processing facility in Marietta, just outside Atlanta. We had a GMP, good manufacturing practices facility that could grow the cells. We had a team of cell culture engineers to grow up these cells. And then roughly 2 weeks later, we would send those cells back to the clinical investigator, and they would inject those cells into the typical recipient area. But in these clinical trials, we restricted, as is, I think, pretty much the norm, into the vertex or thinning crown, not over the whole scalp, but we use them in the crown area. And we were able to show that we could take balding men and create some hair follicle growth with just one injection. We followed them over a year to see if it was a durable response, and we were able to show an increased number of terminal visible hairs a year later. And so we worked with that system, and we're terribly excited, and we're going to transition from phase 2 to phase 3, which people call a pivotal trial or a trial for registration. And at that time, we found another factor that really had a beneficial effect on the trichogenicity of these cells. And so we elected to pause from going to phase 3 and do another of these iterative phase 2 trials to show that if we could optimize the effectiveness. And at that point, we hit a point that you hear from people in biotech startups a lot, and that was we ran out of money. So we were defunded before we could go forward, and so the program was put on pause. And now with this relationship we've just formed with partnership with Stemson, which is an induced pluripotent stem cell company based in San Diego that's working on, guess what? Creating new hair follicles. So they're looking at reprogramming adult cells available through a blood draw and reprogramming them into induced pluripotent stem cells that they can then bring back forward into hair follicle
and I just
cells.
I'm going to push that into a little bit of a later edge.
Yeah.
So now we're looking at the current and the future. So I just want to bring us up to snuff on what happened in the past. What was different about the Adireds and your approach with some of the other research centers in the world?
Oh, good. Thank you So I mentioned earlier on that a lot of people are looking at dermal cells, the dermal sheath, dermal cup, dermal papilla cells, and most of the programs were looking at those, and for good reason. It was a lot easier to grow a lot of fibroblasts. The keratinocytes, the epidermal cells that actually form the hair shaft, are considerably more difficult to grow and multiply in culture without them losing their hair identity. So there were a number of groups, biotech startups, that were in the field trying dermal cell only constructs, and we were using dermal and epidermal combination constructs. And I think that was much of why we had the success that we had, was because we used both cell types that are obviously make up an adult.
Now, when patients ask about this topic, they always say cloning. Doc, when is cloning going to be available? And I think it's important to explain the difference to our listeners between cloning and multiplication. It's relatively easy to clone, say, entire sheep or a human, ethics aside. Cloning a heart or a liver or a hair follicle, not so easy. What's the difference, Ken, between cloning and multiplication? Why is cloning hair more so difficult?
So I think cloning, you referred to like a sheep, is to create the entire structure that is identical to the structures you started with. And in multiplication, certainly in our case, we multiplied cells. We assumed that at the beginning of our program, and we showed we can do it in preclinical models, we can form a number of hair follicles. But in our clinical trials, we were multiplying cells, and those cells would be reinforcement cells that would go into existing hair follicles. So what we did is we took a small area of donor hair and we expanded it, or to use your term, we multiplied the number of cells that could be inductive cells for existing hair follicles. So we, in fact, we're not cloning or duplicating follicles. We were expanding and multiplying these regenerative type cells.
Okay. I think from a standpoint of time, and we could talk for hours about the history of this topic and all the different avenues that it can take. But I think we've covered enough to lay the framework for our upcoming discussion. So I think that's going to bring us to the end of part one. I want to thank you, Ken, for the great review of the past. In the next part of the interview, we'll talk more about where the field is now. So look for part two of this topic on the Hair Transplant Road Show, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, Ken.
Thanks very much, Bob.